Today on the channel, we're going to have kind of a head-to-head competition with an analog style Whoop versus HD. If you're wondering which one should I get this year in 2025, you have the option to fly DJI HD FPV system on something that's 65 millimeter and it's running a 1S battery. Never before in the hobby in the past 11 years have we had that option until late last year with the DJI Air Unit Lite that came out. You can now install that on 1S Whoops and 2S and up. So that's enabled us to see a little bit better with our Whoops. And there's some pros and cons to analog and HD that we're going to go through today. And it might give you a better idea of whether you want to run an analog Whoop or you want to do an HD Whoop. Let's go ahead and get into it. Now let's go ahead and get into it. We're going to have an all-out war between DJI Air Unit Lite 165 millimeter running 1S versus your analog traditional style Tiny Whoops. Now the Tiny Whoop on the left, that's a completely analog system, and I have to tell you, it can outfly the HD system on the right hand side of the screen. And it depends on the pilot. If you have a really skilled pilot, he could probably still beat you anyway with the Nimble 6.5 HD with the 04 on board on the right. However, you're going to probably progress faster as a pilot if you're learning on something that's a little bit lighter, a little bit faster, a little more room to grow versus something like the Nimble 6.5 HD. While that's a great kind of what I call cruiser Whoop, it's like a whole new category because it is much heavier than your traditional Beta FPV Air 6.5, which happens to be one of the most popular Tiny Whoops out there in the FPV community. There are some caveats about weight with the HD system, so you're kind of sacrificing looks of this camera and a 4K onboard DVR, which is super great. You don't have that on the old school analog versions, but I will tell you that most of the analog ones will fly better than this one because of the additional weight. Now, what would be really interesting of DJI if they did something like this in the future, if they made their own flight controller and they were able to somehow make a flight controller and an AIO version. Right now we have a lot of AIO versions for analog and the VTX is built into it, or it's a tiny little VTX that sits right above it, right behind the camera, and that's most of the configurations that we have right now. But on the scale, there's a big difference in weight, and DJI's system is adding a lot of weight to traditionally what we would have around 18 to 19 grams for a Tiny Whoop. Now for the HD route, look at this. This is going to be 27.5 grams. That's without the battery on there. So if we put the Beta FPV Air 6.5 on there, we're at 18.5 grams. That is kind of the sort of community standard as far as Tiny Whoop weights go. That's kind of what everybody's shooting for. And anything below 18.5 grams would be more in the lines of a racing or an ultra light Tiny Whoop class. So let's go ahead and put the 1S 300 milliamp battery on there from sub 250, and that gets us up to 35.8 grams. That baby is heavy for a Tiny Whoop. So yeah, it's pretty small, 65 millimeter, but even with a 300 milliamp battery, that's the smaller end of what people are flying right now. They do have some 260s as well. You can go even a little lighter, but it's not going to save you a lot of weight. And what happens when you add all this weight to something that's this small of an airframe? It really reduces the amount of freestyle that you can do with it and the amount of pickup and racing and kind of whipping out of corners and being able to get back on the throttle quite as fast as its lighter analog alternative. And speaking of the analog alternative, here's the 1S Lava 300 milliamp battery from Beta FPV. That is the stock battery with this particular quad. 26.6 grams total takeoff weight versus 35.9 grams total takeoff weight. Now we can go even lighter with this Air 6.5. They have this new battery. It's a 1S 260 milliamp. If I put that in there, that gets us a little bit lighter than the 300 at 25.5 grams total takeoff weight. And you have to know, I'm not a total hater of HD. I've just not been super impressed with the overall weight once I added the Air Lite to a 65mm Whoop. I thought it was pretty cute and pretty neat at first, and I was really impressed flying it around the house until the freeze frame happened. So when you're flying this one and you get down past, say, 3.6 volt, or you get down to 3.2 volt at a minimal, getting close to those voltage ranges results in a total freeze up of the camera while you're flying, and you can't see where you're going. You crash to the ground, and this happens pretty much every single battery. That drives me a little bit crazy. So if there was a way where they could rework this system and build it into the flight controller itself, maybe giving us a DJI flight controller that will fit a tiny Whoop on the 65mm side of things, that would be amazing. If they could somehow stop that camera from freezing up, maybe a firmware update could fix this, but I feel like adding the extra weight to a 65mm Whoop is kind of defeating the purpose. And it really creates a new category of tiny Whoop in the sort of tiny Whoop cruiser category. Now, one of the biggest things for a lot of people right now, especially with looming recession and all these tariffs and everything else coming in, is the price. Right now, this total setup, I mean, as it sits, if you were to get, say, the cheapest radio out there you possibly could that was decent, the Radio Master Pocket, that's a big favorite of a lot of people. You could get that one for around $50, $60. Get your Goggles 3, that's going to come in around $400 to $450 with the tariffs possibly, and the $229 price point of the Nimble 6.5 HD with the Air unit on there. I mean, you're looking at probably $700, around 700, maybe more once you get all of your batteries and everything you're going to fly with this little guy. So the price is quite a bit more steep with the HD route. Now, the next cheaper option, if you wanted the most primo goggles out there right now, you could get the Orcas. Those are great. You could also get the SkyZone 04X, which I have here, and I have the Orcas and I have the 04X. Me personally, I fly the 04X more than I do the Orcas. I just like this system a little bit better, and I think the DVRs on SkyZone is superior for analog DVR for most of the other goggles out there. And again, that's just my opinion, but that's what I've shared on my channel for about 11 years. Now, this setup right here, this would still cost you an upwards of, say, possibly $500. Now, why is that? That's because the 04X that you see here, they're still pretty pricey. They may have reduced the price maybe since DJI came out with their HD tiny little light version for their 04 cameras. Hopefully SkyZone will do that. I do know that they're still releasing some new versions of their goggles as well. But if you want the ultimate cheapest route to get into analog FPV, still the best option to be able to get everything in one box and a case is going to be the ready to fly option. And yeah, they do exist. There's a whole bunch of different companies that make the ready to fly option, and usually you'll see it listed on the websites as RTF. So look for the RTF tagline in the name of the product. Here is the Emax Nano Scout. It's a Tiny Hawk Nano Scout, and this one's around, I believe it was around $200 and some right now, like $280. But that includes the case, the charger, 2 batteries, this sort of full-size style transmitter, and it has a set of FPV goggles that the monitor actually detaches, and it also has SD card support to record your videos. Beside all that, though, this one flies really good. And a lot of times when you buy a Tiny Hawk, they do fly good, and they're great trainers. If you're watching this in 2025, it's possible that you never heard of Tiny Hawk. But 5 years ago, even 6, 7 years ago, it seems that Tiny Hawk came out, and it sort of changed the game for getting beginners into FPV. So the Tiny Hawk series is a legacy series. And now with the Nano Scout, this little guy right here is the newest one from Emax for 2025. And $280, I think, will get you started with a little bit better pair of goggles than some of the other RTFs that I've seen. You also have the option to take this off and mount it to the transmitter if you wanted to start off like that with a little more line of sight style and then goggle up later. I always tell people to start flying line of sight indoors first and then goggle up. You're just going to be a much better pilot once you start really flying FPV. So there they all sit together. This is the ready to fly one. This is the DJI Lite version with the 04 on board. That's the Nimble 6.5 HD. I reviewed it last week, and even though it flew fine, it had some issues with freeze up. So I think if you're going to go HD, everybody should go for 2S. Like, that's going to be my recommendation. If you're watching this channel, you're going to get an honest opinion about what I think is good. So I'm not going to steer you the wrong direction. One of the whole reasons I do this channel is because guys used to help me out the field when I was a kid growing up. They would tell me what airplane to buy, and I would go out and buy that airplane, and it would save me like hundreds and hundreds of dollars because I didn't know what to buy. And so that's the greatest thing I could do on my channel, is return that favor to you guys and give you an honest opinion on what you should buy. Now, as far as the fun factor, still like 10 out of 10 with any of the bind and fly style analog whoops out there. Try to find yourself something with the BT 2.0 connector on there. This is a great cable. The Air 6.5, again, is the most popular one out there right now, I think. And the Nimble 6.5 series, not bad. The newbie drone one that came out a while ago, the Hummingbird, I think it was the V4 or 5 or 6, I don't even know at this point, but that one had a PH 2.0 connector on it, and I do believe they're going to upgrade that coming up. So that was one thing that people were hoping that would be different. They were hoping that it would be the A30 connector, but it was actually this one. It was the PH 2.0. So that was one of the drawbacks of the Hummingbird that came out recently, even though it was a great quad. Now, if you just want to just get started today and not have to buy anything else or search another website or go find a different pair of goggles, get yourself a ready to fly. Start out with something like the Emax Tiny Hawk little Nano Scout. It will be a fun little quad, and the goggles are not that bad. And I'm not a big fan of the box style goggles. I prefer the binocular style goggles. But again, the 04X by SkyZone are my favorite ones. I'll put links down for all of these. And after this little last talk with you guys, I'm going to take you guys and fly around with both my Air 6.5 and the HD version, the Nimble 6.5. So you guys can kind of see the difference. You will know immediately why the analog one is still more fun than slapping an extra bit of weight onto a 65 millimeter tiny whoop. I think you're going to see a big difference between the two, and you'll kind of get what I'm talking about. Cheaper sometimes can be more fun. So without further ado, let's go ahead and fly together, and I'll show you some differences. Okay, so we're going to start off with flying analog. This is the Air 6.5 out in the yard, and this was one of the first days that I had it, and you can see right away it's quite nimble. If you want, it'll freestyle, it'll race. This is the racing edition. There's a little slight difference between the KV on the motors for the racing and the freestyle version, but this one gives me plenty of speed across the yard. Tracks pretty good, and it's almost kind of more nimble than I personally need. I could probably slow down a little bit, but I think this one's super fun because it is ultra light, and if you do crash, a lot of times you don't have anything happen to it. You might lose a prop here or there, but it will power loop, it will split S, and you can even get pretty creative with flying this one, and you're going to learn and progress with that one. Now with the HD one, look at the big difference between the flying characteristic between the Nimble 6.5 HD. What you're seeing right here, this is about what it looks like in the goggles, but the performance, it's way down in comparison to a lightweight typical analog FPV whoop. You can kind of judge what's happening here. You can change the tilt, fly a little faster with this one, but when you get up on the throttle, what happens is the battery does sag out quite a bit, and then you end up in that dangerous freeze frame voltage, which is around 3.6 to volt and under. So that's gonna be kind of an issue. Your camera's gonna freeze up, your drone's gonna drop to the ground. Whereas analog, I can fly right down to about 3.2 volt, and I'm still rocking the camera, and I can come back in and just barely make my landing on the picnic table behind myself. So here you can see both are up at the same time, and I'm just ripping around the yard with the analog Air 6.5 on the left, and just kind of moseying around with my Air Unit Lite, because if I push the throttle again, I'm going to get kind of a battery sag, and it'll tell me to land now, land now. And I think I'm getting around 2-minute flight time with the air unit Lite on board, with that extra weight with the 1S 300 milliamp. So if you want to get up to about, I guess, around the 4-minute flight time with the air unit Lite, you're going to have to use something like the Weebleed FPV batteries. Those are 1S 460 milliamp batteries, which will give you a longer flight time. But again, like, if you're probably not going to be freestyling it, I'll try to get some batteries from those guys and see if I can actually get some freestyle out of this air unit Lite. But check this out. I mean, you can see my satisfaction level on the analog experience is way higher, and I'm pretty happy with my results from flying that one around the yard. It is a blast to fly. So there you have it, my friend. You kind of have a great idea, a bird's eye view of what's going on in 2025 as far as beginner FPV drones. The tiny whoop scene is still evolving, and I think it would be great later on, like I said, if DJI could incorporate this tiny HD system into an AIO flight controller. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but who knows? Things, have been pretty weird the last 5 years with DJI kind of getting into the FPV scene. So they are kind of watching our crowd, and they've been making some cool stuff for us. Hopefully they'll maybe come around with something like that, because while this is so great, it just works better on 2S because you don't get that freeze frame dropout at that 3.6 volt or under. So watch out for that with the 1S. I can't really recommend it that much right now. I'm sure that there's going to be other ones coming down the pipe that I'll end up reviewing for you guys, but I'm going to be watching out for that freeze frame at 3.6 volts or under. That's just a total pain in the butt when you're flying a 1S Whoop. Just not that fun. So for now, I'm going to stick to my analog ones because they don't freeze frame on me unless there's a problem on the Whoop. So when you're flying a tiny Whoop that's an analog one, for example, you get to the bottom, even all the way down to like 3.2 volt, you'll start to kind of see the screen go a little bit fuzzy, but it's not going to, bam, freeze up on you altogether and make you crash. So there you have it, guys. You can check out my links down below. Hopefully this gave you a little more clarity on what's going on in 2025. And hopefully you enjoyed this kind of showdown between analog and HD in 2025. Guys, take care. I appreciate you hanging out, subscribing, and seeing what's new on the channel. Stay tuned. There's more cool reviews coming up. I will see you on the next one.